The courtroom felt colder than usual, even though the heating vents hummed softly beneath the benches. Rows of wooden seats stretched toward the back wall, polished by decades of nervous hands and restless shifting. The air carried a strange mix of old paper, disinfectant, and something metallic, like tension itself had a smell. People whispered in careful tones, afraid their voices might echo too loudly in a room where every word could change a life. At the front, the judge adjusted her glasses and reviewed the file once more. She had seen hundreds of cases like this, similar charges, similar faces, similar promises of innocence. Nothing about the paperwork suggested today would be different. To her, this was another long morning in a long career. Routine had a way of dulling surprise. Near the prosecution table, attorneys leaned close, murmuring final thoughts. Pens tapped against notepads. A paralegal nervously flipped through a folder, checking the same pages again and again as if something might suddenly disappear. On the defense side, the accused sat rigidly, hands folded, jaw tight. His expression was carefully neutral, the kind people practiced in mirrors. He avoided looking anywhere for too long. Beside the aisle, almost unnoticed, lay the police dog. He rested on his side, leash slack, head lowered between his paws. To the casual observer, he looked calm, almost bored. His coat was immaculate, his posture disciplined even in rest. Years of training showed in every still muscle. His handler stood nearby, one hand lightly touching the leash, eyes scanning the room out of habit more than concern. The handler trusted the dog completely. He always had. No one questioned why the dog was there. Police dogs were common in high-risk cases, and this one fit perfectly into the background, another uniformed presence meant to reassure order. No one wondered what he remembered. No one considered what he might sense. Several rows back near the aisle sat the smallest person in the room. The 3-year-old girl's feet dangled above the floor, shoes swinging gently as she shifted her weight. She clutched a worn, stuffed animal against her chest, its fur matted from years of love. Her guardian sat beside her, focused on the front of the room, barely noticing how the child's eyes roamed curiously from face to face. Courtrooms were not built for children, and children were rarely invited into them. She had come quietly, obediently, not understanding why she needed to be so still. At first, the girl's attention drifted like any child's would. She watched a ceiling fan spin slowly. She studied the patterns in the carpet. She counted the lights overhead until she lost track and started over. The voices at the front blurred into a dull rhythm, words too big and serious to mean anything to her. Then something changed. She felt it before she understood it, a tightening in her chest, a strange heaviness in the air. Children notice things adults often ignored, not because they were smarter, but because they hadn't learned how to tune discomfort out. The girl hugged her stuffed toy tighter and leaned forward slightly. Her eyes found the police dog. At first she smiled. Dogs made sense to her. Dogs didn't hide behind words. But the dog wasn't looking at her. His eyes were open now, alert, fixed on something across the room. His breathing had slowed, deep and controlled, the way it did when instinct rose quietly to the surface. The girl followed his gaze. Across the room, the defendant shifted in his seat, just slightly, barely noticeable. His foot tapped once, then stilled. His shoulders stiffened as if he had suddenly remembered where he was. He lifted his eyes for a brief moment and met the dog's stare. Something passed between them. Not anger, not fear, recognition. The dog's ears twitched. His nose lifted subtly, drawing in the air. Scents told stories humans could never read. Old sweat, old fear, a trace of violence long gone but never erased. Memory surged not as images but as sensation, pressure, pain. A sudden blow, his handler's voice shouting. The chaos of a moment that had nearly ended much worse than it did. The dog did not move. Training held him still. Discipline wrapped tightly around instinct. But instinct never vanished. The little girl felt her smile fade. She didn't know why, only that something about the man made her stomach twist. She looked back at the dog, then again at the man, her brows knitting together in confusion. The adults around her remained focused on the judge, on the lawyers, on the familiar choreography of justice. No one noticed the silent exchange happening beneath the surface. The judge cleared her throat and began speaking. Her voice was calm, authoritative, practiced. Each sentence fell into place like a well-worn path. Heads nodded, pens scribbled. The room relaxed slightly, lulled by procedure. Except the dog. His body was still, but tension crept through his spine. His tail remained flat, his muscles ready. He did not growl, he did not stand, he waited. The girl shifted again, restless now. She tugged gently at her guardian's sleeve, but the adult didn't look down. Court was no place for interruptions. The child fell silent, but her eyes never left the dog. She could sense his alertness, the way animals sense one another's moods without explanation. Time stretched, minutes passed. The dog inhaled deeply again. The scent was unmistakable now. The girl's heart began to race, though she didn't know why. A sense of urgency bubbled up inside her, raw and unfiltered. She felt like she needed to say something, but she didn't have the words. Children often acted when adults hesitated, not because they were brave, but because they hadn't learned fear of being wrong. Her small hand loosened from the stuffed toy. Slowly, almost uncertainly, she raised her arm. At first, no one noticed. The judge continued reading. The attorneys listened. The courtroom hummed with quiet focus. The girl's finger extended, pointing, not randomly, not playfully, but with purpose she didn't understand herself. She pointed at the dog. In that instant, the dog's ears snapped fully upright. His eyes sharpened, and the quiet courtroom stood unknowingly on the edge of a moment that would change everything. The police dog did not rise. Not yet. Training anchored him to the floor like iron. Years of drills had taught him the difference between instinct and command, between reaction and restraint. In a courtroom, stillness was obedience. Silence was discipline. He remained where he was, eyes forward, body unmoving, yet inside him memory stirred. It had been a night soaked in rain when it happened. Months earlier, the streets had glistened under flickering streetlights, puddles reflecting red and blue flashes that smeared across the pavement. The call had come in fast and sharp, suspect fleeing, armed, volatile. The handler's voice that night carried urgency but not fear. It never did. The dog had surged forward on command, muscles burning with purpose, nose slicing through damp air heavy with gasoline, sweat, and panic. He remembered the chase not as images but as sensations. The slap of wet concrete under his paws, the metallic tang of adrenaline, the way the scent ahead of him spiked suddenly, sharp, aggressive, desperate. The suspect had doubled back into a narrow alley, trash bins rattling as he crashed through. The dog had closed the distance quickly. He always did. Then came the moment training could not soften. The man had turned suddenly, not to surrender but to strike. Pain exploded across the dog's side, an impact meant for his handler. The world had lurched, sounds blurred. The dog had reacted anyway, instinct overriding pain, body moving to shield the human he trusted more than himself. Commands shouted, footsteps pounded. The man was restrained. The threat ended. But pain lingered. The dog recovered. He always did. Vets praised his resilience. The handler rubbed behind his ears and whispered that everything was fine. Officially it was. The incident was closed, filed away among hundreds of others. The handler returned to duty with the same confidence as before. The dog returned too, scar hidden beneath fur, trauma hidden deeper still. What no report could record was memory. Dogs did not remember like humans, with stories and timelines. They remembered through scent, through tension in the air, through the way a body moved when it meant harm. Those memories slept until awakened by familiarity. Now in the courtroom, that familiarity crept back. The dog's nose worked slowly, carefully. The smell was faint, layers of soap, fabric, and time tried to bury it, but underneath lingered something old, something sharp, something violent. His breathing slowed further, chest rising and falling in deliberate rhythm. He did not bare his teeth. He did not growl. He waited, assessing. His handler sensed the change before he saw it. The leash was still slack, but the energy at the other end of it had shifted. The handler glanced down, his fingers tightening instinctively around the handle. He knew this dog. He had seen this posture only a handful of times during active searches, during moments when danger hovered just out of sight. This was not agitation. This was focus. The handler scanned the room, trying to find the trigger. Nothing appeared out of place. The defendant sat quietly. Court officers stood relaxed. No raised voices, no sudden movements. And yet the dog's attention was locked forward. The handler's jaw tightened. His mind raced through possibilities. Dogs could react to stress, to unfamiliar environments, to changes in routine. But this was different. This was recognition. He felt it in his gut, the same way soldiers sensed ambush before the first shot. The handler leaned slightly closer and whispered the dog's name under his breath. The dog did not look at him. That alone sent a chill through the handler's spine. Across the room, the defendant swallowed hard. His eyes flicked downward, then back up, as if checking whether he was being watched. He shifted again in his chair, shoulders hunched slightly forward now. Sweat beaded at his temple despite the cool air. He told himself to breathe, to stay calm. Dogs were just dogs. This one couldn't possibly. But the stare burned. He remembered the alley too. He remembered the weight slamming into him from the side, the flash of pain, the chaos that followed. He remembered the dog's eyes that night, unblinking, relentless, fearless. He had tried to forget that gaze. He had convinced himself it was buried in the past, sealed away with old mistakes and sealed records. He had not expected the dog to be here. Fear crept up his spine, slow and unwelcome. He forced his expression back into neutrality, aware of how quickly suspicion could bloom in a courtroom. He pressed his palms together, willing his hands to stop trembling. The dog inhaled again. Yes, it was him. The sound of the judge's voice washed over the room, steady and authoritative, but the dog heard only fragments. His world narrowed to scent and posture, to the way the man's muscles tightened when watched. He could sense the spike of fear now, sharp and acrid, leaking into the air despite the man's effort to hide it. Fear smelled different when it was guilt. The dog's tail remained flat against the floor. His ears stayed forward. He did not move, not yet. Training demanded patience. He had learned that action came only when ordered, but recognition did not require permission. Behind him, the handler felt his own pulse quicken. He followed the line of the dog's gaze and finally noticed the defendant's discomfort, the stiff posture, the shallow breathing, the eyes that refused to settle. It was subtle, easy to miss, but once seen, it could not be unseen. The handler swallowed. Had this man been part of that night? He tried to remember names, faces, reports. Everything blurred together after years on the job, but the dog never forgot. That was what made him invaluable and dangerous in the wrong moment. The handler shifted his stance, ready now, ready to respond if needed, ready to intervene if the dog broke protocol. He trusted his partner, but courtrooms had rules. Optics mattered. One wrong move could jeopardize everything. Several rows back, the little girl watched silently. She didn't know any of this. She didn't know about alleys or reports or buried records. She only knew the dog felt different now, tense, alert, uneasy. Animals had a way of broadcasting emotion without words, and children had a way of receiving it without filters. Her small chest tightened. She looked from the dog to the man again. The man's fear unsettled her. It felt wrong, heavy, like when adults argued behind closed doors. She squeezed her stuffed toy, thumb rubbing a worn patch of fabric as if it might ground her. The courtroom droned on. The judge referenced dates. The attorneys nodded. Jurors listened politely. The machinery of justice rolled forward, unaware of the quiet storm gathering at floor level. The dog's claws flexed once against the polished wood. The handler noticed. He bent slightly, murmuring another soft command meant to reassure to ground. The dog acknowledged it, not by looking away but by holding himself even stiller. His discipline impressed even now, but discipline could not erase memory. It could only contain it. Time stretched thin. The scent remained. The fear grew stronger. And somewhere deep inside the dog, instinct began to push harder against restraint, whispering that danger recognized was danger that should never be ignored. The little girl shifted forward on her seat, heart pounding, driven by a feeling she could not name. Something was wrong. And soon she would be the first to act on it. The courtroom carried on, oblivious to the storm brewing in its midst. Witnesses gave their statements with precise diction, articulating every detail the prosecutors had rehearsed. The defendant sat rigidly in his chair, eyes fixed on the floor, hands folded neatly in his lap. His expression was carefully neutral, but every so often his fingers twitched, betraying the tension he worked so hard to hide. To the casual observer, it seemed like a standard legal proceeding, a routine case that would conclude without drama. No one suspected that beneath the polished veneer of law, something extraordinary was unfolding. The police dog remained near the front, perfectly still, muscles taut beneath his sleek coat. His nose twitched subtly as he drew in the air, dissecting the scents layered within the courtroom: perfume, paper, disinfectant, and the unmistakable, lingering odor of fear. He had encountered this smell before, though he had not realized it until now. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but the dog's instincts did not lie. His ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring, pupils narrowing slightly. He was aware, fully aware, even as the judge's voice droned on, mechanically, over dates, times, and testimonies. The little girl sat further back, clutching her stuffed toy as tightly as if it could anchor her in the chaos she didn't yet understand. Her eyes, wide and curious, had tracked the dog's gaze ever since she had noticed the shift in his posture. She had not learned yet that animals remembered events humans could forget, or that fear left a trace in the air long after the event had passed. Her young mind only knew that something felt wrong. She could sense tension as easily as she sensed warmth or cold. And instinctively, she turned her eyes toward the man at the defense table. The man shifted slightly, as though the air around him had grown heavier. He forced himself to breathe evenly, though each shallow inhale was scented with the sharp tang of unease. His mind raced through memories he had tried to bury: the alley, the chase, the sudden impact, the dog's unwavering eyes, the handcuffs, the chaos, the night when everything went wrong. He had thought he had buried it, convinced himself it was safely filed under past mistakes. But the dog remembered. Animals never forgot. And now, the memory had returned with subtle force, brushing against the edges of consciousness, warning him that recognition had arrived. Meanwhile, the judge asked another witness to recite the events as they had occurred. The witness's voice was measured, careful. Words that should have sounded factual instead echoed oddly in the silent room, dissonant and hollow. Some jurors nodded automatically, unconsciously following the script they believed justice required. But others, less experienced, noticed the defendant's twitching hands and the subtle tension in his shoulders. A few glimpsed the rigid muscles of the dog and the careful focus of his handler, nodding the energy in the room that refused to match the mundane proceedings. The little girl's gaze remained locked on the dog. She didn't understand legal terms or courtroom etiquette. She only understood the feeling: something was wrong and everyone was ignoring it. She shifted slightly, tilting her head, studying the dog's body language. Even from her distance she could see it: the subtle stiffness in his shoulders, the slight lift of his chin, the alertness that contradicted his outward stillness. Her small hand tightened around the stuffed toy. She could sense danger the way adults sense sunlight or wind: unspoken, undeniable, urgent. The defendant tried to appear calm. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. His mind raced. He remembered the dog from that rainy night, the attack, the chase, the way the animal had anticipated every move he had made. He had thought it ended. He had thought the night was buried, but the dog's presence reminded him that nothing could erase recognition. The dog remembered the fear. The dog remembered the danger, and the dog remembered him. Across the room, the handler observed every subtle motion of his partner. He could see the awareness sharpening in the dog's eyes. The dog was not reacting to the room generally or to random movement. His attention was precise, deliberate, and focused. The handler's pulse quickened. He had trained alongside this dog for years and trusted him more than he trusted anyone. The instincts he witnessed now, perfectly balanced between discipline and memory, were undeniable. Something was about to happen. The little girl finally leaned forward slightly, shifting on her chair to get a better view. Her small finger extended almost instinctively, pointing. She didn't know why. She didn't understand cause or consequence. She only felt that something was wrong, that the dog knew something everyone else had overlooked. Adults would later marvel at how she had noticed it first, how instinct and innocence combined to pierce the fog of courtroom formality. For now she simply pointed, her eyes wide, her tiny heart pounding. The courtroom, still locked in routine, remained unaware of the quiet tension. The judge read passages, lawyers presented evidence, and jurors listened attentively, none fully grasping the story that was being told without words. The air vibrated subtly, as if holding its breath. Every detail, the defendant's nervous movements, the dog's alert posture, the girl's unshakable gaze, converged into a moment just on the edge of eruption. The dog's body stiffened fractionally. The handler sensed it instantly. Something inside the animal had triggered, a memory, a warning, an instinct. The dog's eyes did not waver. They were fixed, unblinking, scanning the defendant as though reading an invisible ledger only he could understand. Fear had a scent and recognition had a weight. Both were present now, invisible to all but two witnesses, the dog and the child. Minutes passed in silence, yet it felt like hours. The little girl's tiny finger remained extended, pointing steadily, as if drawing a line that adults could not see. The defendant shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming at his temples. The handler tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, but confident that the dog would hold himself unless given command. And in that quiet tension, the courtroom was suspended, a fragile moment, balancing between normalcy and revelation, where only instinct and innocence could see the truth. No one spoke, no one reacted, yet the story was being written silently with every twitch, every glance, and every unspoken recognition. And slowly, inexorably, the courtroom was moving toward the moment that would change everything. The courtroom hummed with a rhythm only adults understood, voices of authority, whispers of procedure, pens scratching on paper. Jurors sat upright, maintaining the solemn composure expected of them. Lawyers continued their rehearsed lines, their words sharp and precise, designed to shape perception with every carefully chosen phrase. The judge, serene but commanding, presided over the room like a conductor over an orchestra, ensuring every motion followed protocol. To the untrained eye, it was a normal proceeding, a routine case unfolding as it always did. Yet beneath the veneer of order, a quiet storm waited to break. The dog's body remained motionless, obedient in appearance, but the tension coiled in his muscles like a spring. His ears were no longer relaxed. They twitched forward, alert to the subtlest changes in posture, scent, and energy in the room. His gaze never wavered from the defendant, whose eyes darted occasionally toward the dog, though he tried to conceal it. His pulse raced, yet he remained frozen, hoping his stillness would obscure recognition. The little girl, seated several rows back, watched every detail. Her stuffed toy was pressed against her chest, worn fur rubbing against her cheek. She did not understand the complexity of the trial, the intricacies of evidence or testimony, but she felt the energy. Fear and tension, subtle yet undeniable, hovered between the dog and the man. Her small hand tightened around her toy. Her gaze shifted, tracking every twitch of the dog's ears, every tightening of its jaw, every subtle movement of its paws. Then instinct took over. The child's arm lifted slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Her little finger extended, pointing directly at the dog. She did not speak, for she could not articulate what she sensed, but the action itself was deliberate. It was not a random gesture, not an innocent movement of a bored child. She had seen enough in her short life to know when something felt wrong. And the dog, alert, precise, sensing her focus, recognized it immediately. At first, the adults in the courtroom did not notice. Their eyes were glued to papers, pens, or the judge's words. Time ticked slowly as the child's finger hovered, steady and unwavering. The dog inhaled sharply through his nose, nostrils flaring. The scent was unmistakable. Recognition had awakened fully now. His body remained restrained by training, yet his instinct simmered just beneath the surface. The air around him seemed to tighten, vibrating subtly with energy only some could sense. The defendant swallowed hard. His hands, which had been folded neatly, twitched again. He shifted in his chair, trying to appear calm, but the dog's gaze was relentless. The memories surged: the alley, the chase, the sudden impact, the chaos, the teeth and paws that had once surrounded him. Every detail the dog remembered was being recalled now, amplified by proximity and scent. The man had hoped time and distance would bury it, but instinct and memory had no regard for human wishes. The handler's pulse quickened. He felt the change immediately. Years of training and partnership had taught him that subtle shifts in the dog's posture were never meaningless. He observed the tightening of the muscles, the tilt of the head, the barely perceptible stiffening of the shoulders. He whispered the dog's name softly under his breath. The dog did not turn. He did not need to. His attention was fully locked on the defendant. Recognition had arrived, and the instinct to protect and react coexisted with the discipline that had been drilled into him for years. The little girl's gaze never wavered. Her eyes tracked the dog, then the man, then back again. The fear she sensed was intangible but real. She did not understand the danger in a conventional sense, but she understood something was wrong, something significant, something that the adults around her could not see or feel. And so she remained pointing, tiny finger outstretched, unwavering. Minutes passed. The courtroom seemed suspended in a fragile equilibrium. Every word from the judge, every note scribbled by the attorneys, every subtle twitch of a juror's fingers was overshadowed by the tension building quietly between the dog and the man. The dog's nostrils flared repeatedly, nostrils working in silence, sampling the air for threats. The defendant's attempt to control his breathing betrayed him. His pulse thudded loudly in his own ears, or so it felt. Then came the first audible sign, a low, almost imperceptible growl. It was a sound so soft that most would not have noticed it, had the courtroom not been already steeped in tension. The handler froze. His hand tightened slightly on the leash. The growl did not escape from anger but from instinct, recognition, warning. It was a sound calibrated perfectly to convey danger while maintaining control. The judge paused mid-sentence, sensing a disruption in the rhythm she expected. Lawyers glanced toward the source, curiosity flickering across their faces. Jurors leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift in atmosphere even if they did not yet understand it. All eyes turned slowly toward the dog, whose body now quivered just enough to betray his alertness. The little girl gasped softly. She had been right all along. Something had changed. Her instinct had aligned with the dog's memory. She tugged gently at her guardian's sleeve, trying to draw attention, but the adult was too focused on the formal proceedings to notice. Yet in that tiny gasp, the courtroom's silent observer was signaling the truth. The dog had recognized danger, and the danger was real. The dog's growl grew slightly, still low but resonant, vibrating subtly across the polished wood floor. His eyes did not leave the defendant. His body remained grounded, but the power in his muscles suggested a readiness to act, a potential energy held in check by discipline. Every sense of every human in the room, even if they did not consciously recognize it, responded. The air felt heavier. Shadows seemed deeper. Time slowed, almost imperceptibly for those attuned to the tension. The defendant's hand twitched again. He swallowed hard, jaw tightening as he realized he was being observed in a way no courtroom testimony could capture. This dog remembered. The dog recognized. and he had been seen by a small, unassuming child whose instinct had detected the same truth. The handler whispered a few more words of reassurance, and the dog relaxed fractionally, though not entirely. Discipline still held him, but memory remained. Recognition remained. And in the gallery, the little girl's tiny finger remained pointed, steady, unwavering, a silent testament to the truth unfolding before everyone's eyes. No one in the courtroom had yet reacted. No one spoke, but the stage was set. The story was shifting in a direction no one had anticipated, and slowly, inexorably, the dog's instinct, the child's intuition, and the defendant's hidden guilt were about to collide in a moment that would change everything. The courtroom remained unnervingly still. Every adult assumed the child's pointing was nothing more than innocent curiosity, perhaps a small gesture misinterpreted by her guardian. Yet the dog, trained to obey commands above all else, knew differently. His body tensed, muscles coiled like springs ready to release, every sense sharpened by a memory that time could not erase. For months, the handler had trusted his partner to differentiate between danger and routine, instinct and obedience. But now, recognition pushed the dog to the brink, and discipline alone could not contain it. A low growl rumbled from deep within the dog's chest, barely audible but unmistakable to those attuned to subtle cues. The handler's pulse quickened. He had heard this growl before during high-stress field work, usually when danger lurked just beyond sight, unseen but unmistakable. This time, it was directed at the defendant. The man's posture stiffened, his calm mask beginning to crack as beads of sweat appeared at his temple. The dog's tail remained low, flat against the polished floor, a symbol of disciplined restraint. Yet his ears twitched, nostrils flaring as he assessed the room. The air around him seemed to ripple with an unspoken warning. Each subtle motion, each tiny flex of muscle carried weight, a tension invisible to all but the most observant. The handler leaned closer, whispering a soft command meant to soothe, but the dog's gaze remained unwavering, locked on the man. Recognition had overtaken caution. The defendant shifted slightly, a subtle movement but enough to trigger the dog's full attention. The memory from months ago, the chase through rain-slicked alleys, the sudden strike that had threatened his handler, the chaos of that night flared within the dog. He remembered every scent, every sound, every motion. Training had taught him patience, but instinct demanded action. His growl intensified, resonating through the courtroom, low and measured but impossible to ignore. Jurors stirred slightly, sensing the change even if they did not understand it. Some leaned forward, scanning the room, instinctively aware that something had altered the courtroom's rhythm. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, pens halted in motion, papers untouched. The judge's voice faltered briefly, trying to maintain order in the increasingly tense atmosphere. Courtrooms were built for logic, for evidence, for procedure, but instinct and memory did not follow rules. The little girl's tiny hand remained raised, pointing. She had not wavered, and now she sensed the shift. The dog's growl, subtle yet distinct, confirmed her instincts. Her eyes widened, fear mingled with clarity. She understood in her own way that the dog had recognized something dangerous. Her small body leaned forward slightly, as if to support the truth that adults ignored. The defendant's pulse raced. He felt the dog's scrutiny as a physical weight pressing down on him. Memories he had tried to suppress, the alley, the struggle, the dog's unwavering eyes, returned with vivid intensity. He swallowed hard, jaw tight, hands trembling just enough to betray him. He had underestimated the power of instinct. No testimony, no legal argument could erase the recognition emanating from the animal in front of him. The handler whispered again, words meant to calm, to anchor, to remind the dog of discipline. But the dog's mind was focused, trained reflex and instinct merging in perfect synchronization. Recognition, the handler knew, could not be ignored indefinitely. And yet, he also understood that action in a courtroom could have consequences far beyond the immediate threat. He remained poised, one hand lightly on the leash, heart pounding, aware that the next few moments could define the outcome of the case entirely. Then it happened. The dog shifted his weight slightly, barely enough to lift his front paws off the floor. The growl deepened, resonating across the polished wood, vibrating subtly under the feet of the spectators. Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned. The judge struck the gavel instinctively, calling for order, but the sound could not mask the energy in the room. All eyes finally fell on the dog, realizing that the small, disciplined creature in the front row was no ordinary presence. The defendant froze. His eyes widened as recognition surged fully. The dog remembered him. Every instinct screamed at him: exposure, danger, consequence. He had hoped anonymity, distance, and time had buried his past actions. Now he understood that instinct and memory were far more enduring than paper and testimony. The little girl's finger wavered slightly, then pointed again. She sensed the shift, knew it was significant even though she could not name why. The dog's posture communicated a warning she instinctively understood. A silent language spoke between them, a bond of awareness beyond human comprehension. Adults watched, confused, alarmed, but unable to perceive the truth encoded in subtle motions and instinctive reactions. Court officers moved cautiously, approaching the front row to ensure safety, though there was no aggression yet. The dog remained restrained by discipline, growling, alert, but not attacking. He was poised, ready to protect, to act if the threat escalated, yet perfectly controlled. Every observer felt the tension, whether consciously or not. The air felt electric, charged with recognition and unspoken danger. The judge, finally realizing that this was no ordinary disruption, paused the proceedings. The gavel's echo reverberated across the room. Lawyers and jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Something had shifted fundamentally in the courtroom. The story being told through testimony and evidence was suddenly overshadowed by instinct, memory, and awareness. Adults had underestimated both the dog and the child. The handler's grip on the leash remained steady, though his mind raced. He had trained this dog for years, fought alongside him, witnessed his instinct in dangerous situations countless times. Yet even he was aware that the dog's recognition today was extraordinary, perfectly timed, precise, undeniable. It was a warning delivered without violence, a memory recalled without words, a truth revealed silently. The defendant's face betrayed panic now. Subtle tremors ran through his body. He realized that his carefully constructed facade had failed. The dog had remembered and the child had seen it first. His past, which he had believed safely buried, was now present in the room, undeniable, irrefutable. The little girl finally lowered her finger slightly, but her eyes remained fixed. She had done what adults could not. She had noticed the subtle shift, understood the invisible signal, and pointed it out. The dog had answered in kind, breaking protocol in a controlled warning that exposed a hidden truth. The courtroom, suspended in tension, held its breath. The dog remained standing now, a silent sentinel, growling softly but authoritatively. The judge, the attorneys, the jurors, all were aware that a moment of instinct had overtaken procedure, and that recognition had changed everything. It was no longer a routine case. It was no longer a simple proceeding. It had become a story of memory, instinct, and revelation, carried on four paws and witnessed by the smallest, bravest observer in the room. Every heartbeat in that courtroom aligned with the dog's unwavering stare. The scene was set. Something extraordinary had begun, and the outcome would depend on what followed in the next moments that would test discipline, courage, and the unspoken bond between humans, animals, and even children. The gavel had barely echoed when the judge called for an immediate recess. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, papers shuffled nervously, and eyes darted between the dog, the defendant, and the little girl. What had seemed like a minor disruption had now shifted the entire tone of the proceeding. Every person in that room sensed, without fully understanding why, that the ordinary rhythm of the trial had fractured. The dog's controlled growl, the unwavering stare, and the child's pointed finger had revealed something invisible, something adults had overlooked. The defendant's composure cracked the moment the recess was announced. His hands trembled subtly, betraying the calm he had tried to maintain. His breathing came in short, shallow bursts. He could feel the dog's eyes even when not looking directly at him, a weight pressing down, reminding him that recognition had arrived. For months, he had believed his past buried under paperwork, ignored in official records, forgotten by everyone who mattered. Now it demanded acknowledgement. Behind the courtroom doors, investigators and court officers moved quickly, guided by the handler's knowledge of the dog's behavior. He explained, quietly but with authority, that this was not a routine reaction. The dog had never misidentified danger before, and his instincts were precise, refined through years of real-life experiences. Something in the defendant's presence triggered memory, a recognition buried deep but not erased by time. The handler detailed the earlier incident, the rainy alley, the struggle, the violent confrontation where the dog had protected him from harm. Every detail, he emphasized, was consistent with the dog's recognition behavior now. The lead investigator nodded thoughtfully. Dogs didn't remember like humans, but their memories were encoded differently, through scent, experience, and instinct. The reactions of the defendant and the dog were too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The investigators began to cross-reference previous police records, pulling up reports of violent incidents involving the same handler and the same unit. Soon, a pattern emerged, one that had been overlooked in the original trial preparations. Months earlier, a violent altercation had occurred in a dark alley involving the defendant. The police report was filed, but the connection to the current case had never been made. The details had been buried in unrelated paperwork, scattered across departments, never linked by the system. Yet here in the courtroom, the dog remembered everything, the exact sequence of events, the scent of fear, the presence of danger. The child, through her innocent observation, had unknowingly validated what the dog instinctively recognized. The investigators shared this information with the judge. Her face remained calm, but her eyes betrayed recognition of the gravity. A routine trial had now intersected with months-old evidence, a previously undisclosed violent incident, and the instinctual memory of a police dog. The courtroom, previously predictable, had transformed into a nexus where instinct, memory, and human oversight collided. Meanwhile, in the gallery, the little girl remained seated, clutching her stuffed toy. She did not understand what had happened behind the closed doors. She only knew something had changed. Her instincts, her pointing, had mattered. Adults often underestimated children's perception, dismissing it as irrelevant or playful, but her unassuming observation had pierced the adult world's veneer of rationality and procedure. In her own way, she had revealed the truth before anyone else could. The defendant, now fully aware of the weight of recognition, tried to steady himself. Memories he had hoped were buried surfaced with relentless clarity. The alley, the confrontation, the teeth and claws, the handler's voice shouting, the dog's unwavering stare. All of it converged now in the room, amplified by the animal's precise attention and the child's silent observation. He realized that his past had not only caught up to him, it had been identified and exposed in a way no human testimony could replicate. The handler watched the dog closely, noting the subtle shifts in posture. The growl had ceased, replaced by a steady vigilance. The dog's discipline had returned now that the threat was identified and understood, but the memory lingered beneath the surface. The animal had fulfilled its duty, signaling danger without endangering anyone, demonstrating a combination of instinct and training that had prevented catastrophe. The courtroom reconvened after the recess, but the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. Jurors, lawyers, and the judge were now acutely aware of the extraordinary events that had occurred. The dog, calm but alert, remained at the front. The little girl, quiet and observant, had been removed from the room for safety, unaware of the chaos she had indirectly helped to reveal. Her pointing had triggered recognition. Her observation had validated instinct. Adults were left to comprehend the consequences of both. As proceedings resumed, the new evidence was introduced carefully, with the judge allowing consideration of the previously overlooked incident. Witnesses were called to confirm the details, and the attorneys had to navigate a drastically altered landscape. The defendant's composed exterior could no longer hold under scrutiny, as the dog's recognition had paved the way for truth to surface. The courtroom, previously routine, had become a stage where instinct, memory, and human oversight intersected dramatically. Even the jurors, initially disengaged, now leaned in attentively. They sensed that a hidden layer of reality had been exposed, one that the procedural rules could not fully explain. Their eyes shifted repeatedly between the dog and the defendant, noting posture, tension, and subtle cues. Some recognized that they were witnessing a rare convergence of instinct and justice, where the untrained perceptions of a child and the precise memory of an animal outpaced formal human observation. The defendant's demeanor shifted from calm to panicked. His carefully constructed facade unraveled further with each whispered account of the previous violent incident, each recounting of the dog's prior experiences, and the acknowledgement that instinct had identified him. He had underestimated the power of memory, both human and animal, and the quiet observation of a child. Every instinctive signal, every nuanced gesture had combined to expose a truth that could not be ignored. The handler remained vigilant, watching the dog closely, prepared to intervene if necessary, but confident in the animal's training and restraint. The dog had performed flawlessly, communicating danger without aggression, validating the child's observation, and guiding the courtroom toward an awareness that human perception alone could not achieve. By the time the judge called the courtroom to order once more, the hidden truth had fully surfaced. The defendant could no longer maintain his composure. New evidence and old memory combined, facilitated by instinct and validated by a child's observation. The courtroom had changed. Nothing would ever be the same. The dog's role, subtle yet critical, had revealed what paperwork, testimony, and procedure had missed. This case, once assumed simple and routine, now carried layers of complexity and gravity. The courtroom had become a convergence of instinct, observation, and memory, revealing a truth that would have remained hidden if not for the vigilance of a child and the loyalty of a dog. Adults had learned, in the most unexpected way, that truth could emerge from sources they least expected, and that instinct, both human and animal, could be more perceptive than the most careful investigation. The judge, the attorneys, the jurors, all recognized the significance. They understood that the dog's memory, the child's observation, and the defendant's past were intertwined in a way that demanded acknowledgement. It was a reminder that justice was not always linear, and that sometimes the smallest voice, paired with the sharpest instinct, could illuminate what adults overlooked. The courtroom had been transformed. The hidden truth, long buried, was now revealed, and everyone would remember the day when instinct, memory, and innocence collided to expose what had been concealed. The courtroom reconvened slowly after the recess, but the air had shifted so dramatically that it felt almost different to everyone inside. Jurors, who had been rigid and formal, now leaned forward in their seats, scanning the room for details they had previously ignored. Lawyers adjusted their strategies, suddenly aware that the routine evidence they had relied upon might no longer suffice. The judge herself acknowledged, without saying a word aloud, that the case had transformed. It was no longer a simple proceeding. It was a convergence of instinct, memory, and revelation, one that would redefine everyone's understanding of what had occurred. At the front of the courtroom, the police dog lay calmly, though his senses remained alert. His muscles, once coiled with tension, now relaxed only slightly, as if he had delivered his warning and was observing the aftermath. His eyes never left the defendant, whose composure had begun to crumble entirely. Every subtle movement, the tapping of a foot, a twitch of a hand, the slight lift of a shoulder, was catalogued by the dog's trained perception. Every instinct, every memory, had returned to remind the dog of what had happened months ago. The presence of the defendant in the room had rekindled recognition so precise and unwavering that it had exposed hidden truths no document could reveal. The defendant's facade of calm cracked completely as the reality of the situation sank in. He had tried to believe the past was buried, forgotten in official records or dismissed in routine paperwork. But instinct and memory do not disappear. The dog had remembered and the child had observed, validating what no adult had recognized. Panic flickered across the defendant's face, his attempts at controlled breathing failing, revealing fear he could not hide. He realized that every carefully crafted defense, every strategic pause, and every fabricated statement was now vulnerable to scrutiny amplified by a combination of intuition and canine precision. The handler stayed close to the dog, maintaining a firm but gentle grip on the leash. His years of experience had taught him how to read the subtle shifts in the animal's posture, breathing, and tension. He understood that the dog's actions were deliberate, rooted in memory, and carefully balanced between instinct and discipline. The growl, the stare, the shift in weight, all were intentional, designed to alert without causing harm, to warn without escalating violence. And in the child's gaze, the handler noticed something remarkable. A quiet recognition, a mirror of the dog's instinctive focus, that confirmed the truth even before it was spoken. The child had been moved to a side gallery by her guardian, still clutching the worn stuffed toy, unaware of the full impact her silent observation had created. Yet she remained engaged, eyes wide, watching the courtroom unfold like a story she intuitively understood. Her pointing, once dismissed as the behavior of a curious toddler, had been the first act to draw attention to what adults overlooked. In her own way, she had become the link between instinct and recognition, validating the dog's memory and exposing the hidden past of the defendant. Witnesses were recalled, and previously overlooked details were introduced with precision. Statements from months prior now took on renewed significance. The judge allowed the evidence of the earlier violent incident to be considered, connecting the past to the present with a clarity that stunned the courtroom. Lawyers on both sides adjusted their strategies, carefully weaving the testimony of the dog's recognition and the child's observation into the legal narrative. The balance of the trial had shifted irreversibly, with instinct and intuition now playing as much a role as evidence and testimony. The defendant's anxiety grew, his eyes darting repeatedly toward the dog. Every movement of the animal was a reminder of the past encounter, every stare a silent indictment. He realized with a sinking feeling that the dog's memory was infallible and that the child had unknowingly reinforced that recognition. It was a combination he could not contest, a truth that no legal maneuvering could suppress. Fear, once buried beneath the layers of time and rationalization, now dominated his every thought. The courtroom tension reached its peak when the judge asked for a final review of the newly introduced evidence. Jurors listened intently, connecting the dots that had previously gone unnoticed. The dog's presence at the front of the room was no longer seen as a routine precaution, but as a critical witness in its own right. Every subtle motion, every instinctive reaction became part of the narrative, highlighting the gap between human perception and the perceptive abilities of an animal trained in life-and-death scenarios. Finally, the moment of judgment arrived. The courtroom held its collective breath as the defendant's fate was decided, weighed against both traditional evidence and the extraordinary contributions of instinct and observation. The judge acknowledged the dog's behavior and the child's pointing as catalysts for uncovering the truth, framing them within the legal narrative in a way that respected procedure while honoring the undeniable role of intuition. The decision was delivered carefully, balancing justice with recognition of the extraordinary circumstances. After the verdict, the atmosphere shifted from tension to relief. Jurors exchanged glances, aware they had witnessed something extraordinary. Lawyers filed away their notes, and the judge closed the proceedings with a nod that conveyed recognition of the unique chain of events. The handler knelt beside the dog, running his hands along its back in quiet affirmation. The animal had fulfilled its duty with precision, loyalty, and instinct, guiding justice without harm. Outside the courtroom, the little girl reunited with the dog and its handler. She reached out tentatively, still holding her stuffed toy, and the dog approached slowly, sniffing her hand before settling beside her. It was a quiet moment of acknowledgement, a reunion that bridged instinct, innocence, and loyalty. The handler smiled, recognizing that the child had played a role no one could have anticipated. She had seen what adults missed, and her unassuming courage had helped guide the truth to light. The story spread quietly among court staff and law enforcement. It became a legend of sorts, a tale of a police dog whose memory never failed, a child whose instincts were sharper than many adults, and a courtroom transformed by the convergence of observation, memory, and instinct. It was a reminder that justice was not always linear, that sometimes the truth came from unexpected sources, and that loyalty, courage, and perception could change the course of events in ways that exceeded conventional understanding. In the weeks that followed, the dog was praised by his department, celebrated not for aggression or power, but for precision, discipline, and instinct. The handler reflected on the experience, humbled by the remarkable synergy between animal memory and human intuition. The little girl remained blissfully unaware of the profound impact of her actions, yet the bond she had formed with the dog, however brief, became a quiet emblem of vigilance, observation, and courage. Even as life returned to routine, the echoes of that day remained in the courtroom's corridors. The dog's growl, the child's finger, the defendant's fear, they lingered as a silent lesson. That instinct, observation, and courage often reveal truths that documents and testimony cannot, and that sometimes justice is served not by words alone, but by the quiet recognition of those who see what others overlook. Weeks passed after the trial, but the story of that extraordinary courtroom day refused to fade. For many, it was merely a case file, closed and archived, a routine matter with an unexpected twist. Yet for those who had witnessed the subtle interplay of instinct, memory, and courage, the events remained alive, etched into their minds, hearts, and the very air of the courthouse. The dog, the child, the defendant, the handler, all had played roles in a story that transcended normal proceedings. It became a quiet legend whispered among officers, jurors, and court staff alike. The day when truth was revealed by a police dog and a 3-year-old girl. The dog returned to his routine with the handler, but nothing was truly ordinary anymore. Their bond, already strong from years of partnership, deepened as the handler reflected on the extraordinary event. He realized that discipline alone could not account for the dog's performance. It was memory, instinct, and loyalty combined. In debriefings, he recounted the precise reactions, the growl that had begun subtly and built in tension, the unwavering stare, the controlled yet unmistakable recognition. Each detail was a testament to the animal's training and innate perception. Even the smallest gestures, an ear twitch, a flex of a paw, had communicated volumes, guiding justice in ways paperwork never could. The little girl returned to her ordinary life, yet she carried within her the memory of that day. She did not fully comprehend the gravity of her actions, nor the complexity of the adult world that had relied, unwittingly, on her observation. But she remembered the dog, the way he had responded to her gesture, the subtle energy in his presence, the quiet power that radiated from his disciplined frame. It left an imprint, a small but enduring awareness that sometimes courage was measured not by strength or words, but by the act of noticing what others overlooked. In the courtroom, whispers persisted long after the verdict. Lawyers discussed strategy in hushed tones, jurors recounted the unusual chain of events to friends and family, and the judge herself occasionally reflected on the day when instinct had overruled expectation. Many remarked that they had never witnessed anything like it, a canine's memory exposing truth that human observation and testimony had missed, a child's simple gesture amplifying the revelation. It challenged their assumptions about perception, evidence, and the nature of justice. The defendant, meanwhile, grappled with consequences that extended beyond legal sentencing. Fear had first entered his eyes in the courtroom, but its echo lingered far beyond that day. He realized, in a way that words could not erase, that his past actions had been recorded in memory and instinct. The dog had remembered, and the child had noticed. No documents could rewrite that truth, no testimony could obscure it. He became painfully aware of how actions long buried could resurface, not through humans alone, but through the vigilant memory of an animal trained to protect, to observe, and to remember. The handler reflected often on the day's lessons. Years of fieldwork had taught him discipline, patience, and the importance of trust between handler and dog. Yet even he marveled at the interplay that had unfolded in the courtroom. A child's instinct, a dog's memory, a human's fear, and the procedural machinery of justice intersecting in ways no one could have predicted. He realized that sometimes the most critical observations came from unexpected sources, and that vigilance required openness to instinct, to intuition, and to the untrained eyes that might see what seasoned professionals overlooked. The little girl and the dog met occasionally after the trial, always under careful supervision. She approached him tentatively at first, still clutching her stuffed toy, but he responded with a quiet acknowledgement. Their connection, forged in that extraordinary moment of recognition and instinct, became a silent understanding between them. She learned, in her own way, that courage could take many forms. Sometimes it was standing still and noticing. Sometimes it was observing and pointing. And sometimes it was trusting the instincts of another, even if that other had 4 legs and no words. Months later, the case became a teaching story in law enforcement circles and legal studies. Trainers highlighted the dog's performance as an example of memory and recognition, demonstrating how instinctive observation could complement evidence and procedure. Legal scholars discussed the role of unconventional witnesses, a child's observation, a dog's instinct, in challenging assumptions about testimony and truth. The courtroom that day had become a living example of the unexpected paths through which justice could be revealed. Even in mundane moments, the echo of that day lingered. Jurors recalled the subtle tension, the low growl, the pointing finger. Lawyers remembered the shift in dynamics when instinct and recognition disrupted the predictable rhythm of the trial. The judge reflected on the extraordinary collaboration of discipline, memory, and courage. And the defendant carried with him a quiet, unshakable knowledge that no one could ever truly escape the memory of what they had done, whether recorded in paper, preserved in human testimony, or imprinted in the instincts of a loyal animal. The dog remained with his handler, a silent sentinel, embodying memory, loyalty, and unwavering discipline. Yet the quiet moments after duty revealed another side, gentle, attentive, capable of forming bonds with humans in ways that transcended instruction or training. The little girl's visits became part of a ritual of acknowledgement, a bridge between innocence and experience, instinct and awareness. She learned to approach quietly, to respect the dog's discipline, and to understand, even in her own small way, the weight of recognition and memory. In the end, the courtroom returned to its routines. Proceedings continued, cases moved forward, and daily life resumed its measured pace. Yet for those who had been present, that day remained extraordinary. It was a reminder that truth could be discovered in unexpected ways, that courage could be found in the smallest voices, and that instinct and memory, human or animal, could reveal what others overlooked. The little girl, now forever aware of the dog's extraordinary perception, carried a quiet confidence, an understanding that noticing mattered. The dog continued his work with his handler, respected and revered for more than his obedience, respected for the insight his instincts provided. And the echoes of that day, of recognition and courage, remained, shaping a legacy that would influence not only the courtroom but the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed it. It was a story about memory, instinct, courage, and perception, about the unlikely partnership between a child and a dog that unveiled a hidden truth, about the power of observation and the enduring weight of recognition. And it was a story that would linger long after the gavel had fallen, reminding everyone that justice is not always measured in words alone. It is sometimes found in the quiet vigilance of the smallest and most unexpected witnesses.